Okay, welcome back to Gary's Economics. Today we are going to talk about asset price inflation. So the main thing I want to explain today is the difference between asset price inflation and goods and services inflation, which you might call shop price inflation, and why it is important. So the first obvious thing to say is the rate at which asset price increase is not always the same as the rate at which prices in the shops increase. And in general, in the last 20, 30 years, there has been a significant trend for assets to increase more quickly than goods and service prices and also wages, which has of course made housing less affordable. The first thing you need to know is, in the main measures of inflation which you'll see on the news, the most well-known one is CPI, consumer price inflation, but you might also see RPI, retail price inflation. These measures of inflation only look at the prices of goods in the shops, the regular things that you buy, and also services, transport. Basically, your regular expenditures, but they do not look at asset prices. So these measures of inflation do not look at asset prices, which means that these measures of inflation, I would argue they basically underestimate actual inflation, because I think house prices and other asset prices are a part of inflation, but these are only looking at prices in the shops which are going up more slowly. So the second thing is, in my opinion, there is a structural tendency in our economy for asset prices to go up more quickly than shop prices. And the reason for this is, in my opinion, growing inequality. Now, I've looked at this for a very, very long time. This is actually what I wrote my thesis on Oxford, which is on my website. If you want to look at it, I'll put a link in the comments. The reason for that is very simple. Okay, so ordinary people spend almost all of the income they receive in their lifetime. This means that over the course of their life, everything they receive, they spend on goods and services. Rich people act very differently. They spend the majority of their income on buying assets. The richer you are, the greater percentage of your income you are likely to spend on assets, and the lower percentage of your income you are likely to spend on goods and services. So as an economy becomes more wealth unequal, what you then have is a greater share of the assets and a greater share of the purchasing power being held by the rich and the very rich, and a smaller share of the assets and the purchasing power being held by ordinary people. Since ordinary people like goods and services and rich people like assets, as the economy becomes more and more equal, the society as a whole will start to desire more assets and desire less goods and services, which means that asset prices tend to increase relative to wages over time. This makes housing increasingly unaffordable over time in a way that basically tends to get often ignored by economists, because economists focus only on shop price inflation, CPI inflation. So housing just gets more and more unaffordable, and basically nothing gets done about it. The next thing you need to understand is that central banks, such as the Bank of England here in the UK or the Federal Reserve in the US, they try to keep inflation at a 2% level. But when they talk about inflation, they are only looking at shop price inflation, wage inflation. They are not talking about asset inflation. So basically, the central bank, not only is it doing nothing to stop housing from becoming more unaffordable, in a sense, it's exacerbating the problem. Because while they almost completely ignore rising asset prices, rising house prices, they are pretty much refusing to allow wages to rise more than 2 or 2.5% a year. So this creates a structural problem, right? We have a system in which it is almost inevitable that housing will become more expensive over time, and we are not allowing wages to rise. So we can kind of see inevitably this gap will increase. But we have a double problem. So as house prices go up and wages don't go up as quickly, there's only basically two ways to fix this problem. One is more rapid increases in wages, which the central banks won't allow, and one is falls in house prices. So if you have rapid falls in house prices, which is what we would need to make housing significantly more expensive, this causes massive problems essentially. And we see these kinds of collapses. People buy houses with big mortgages. So if your house price suddenly collapses, you are basically immediately bankrupt, because you've bought a £500,000 house, you've borrowed £450,000, now your house is worth only £300. Your net worth is negative 150. So people immediately become bankrupted, and it can cause massive economic problems. So basically, we've created an unfixable problem, right? We need wages to go up. The central bank won't allow it. We need house prices to come down. if house prices come down quickly, it causes an economic collapse. It causes people to be bankrupted. So the situation is essentially unfixable. And I think the way that you fix it is basically to understand that inflation is not one single measure, right? It's not just simply CPI. What you have is three different things, essentially. I think three different main categories of inflation you want to look at, which is goods and service inflation. And within that, we can divide luxury goods and services and essential goods and services. Wage inflation and asset inflation, like house price inflation. Now, the kind of inflation that we've had in the last 4 or 5 years is basically the worst possible kind of inflation. It's been driven primarily by goods and services, especially basic essentials like food and energy. Wages have lagged behind, which means ordinary people's living conditions have fallen. And yet houses have become extremely more expensive in that period. So it's the worst possible combination of inflation for ordinary people. But it's probably worth bearing in mind that it's a really good combination for people who own assets and consume labour. So if you're a very wealthy person, you own a load of assets, you own a lot of natural resources, and what you do is you consume other people's labour, then your situation is great because the things you own have become more expensive, and the workers who you might use to do your goods and to do your services have become cheaper. In a sense, it's a kind of you could describe it as a class warfare kind of inflation, and we've kind of built that into the system. We have baked into our system a kind of inflation where assets, which is in a measure of the power of the rich, continually become more expensive, whereas wages, which is a measure of the power of ordinary people, are basically not allowed to go up by the central bank. I think it should be obvious the best way to fix the housing crisis is to stabilise house prices and encourage specifically wage inflation. You know, there is no other way to make housing affordable. And I would encourage economists to think about this. It's the only way to fix it, really. You need to get wages to go up. I think the best way to make wages go up and house prices not go up is to move that spending power back. You know, ordinary people buy goods and services. You as a worker produce goods and services. If you get money into the hands of ordinary people, they will buy the stuff you produce and your wages will go up. If instead we put all the money in the hands of the rich, they will buy assets, they will buy your houses. Housing will become more expensive and they will become stronger, you will become weaker, and you will lose your house. So that's it basically. To conclude, there's not just one measure of inflation. Asset inflation is very important. The kind of inflation on the news only ever looks at goods and services, and wage inflation is important as well. Secondly, not all kinds of inflation are bad. If your wages are going up faster than the price of goods and services and faster than the price of housing, your life will get better. If housing and goods and services are going up faster than the price of your wages, your life will get worse. I want your life to get better, so let's ask for higher wages. And let's not accept the myth in the media that if your wages go up, it's bad. Pretty obviously, your wages going up is good, especially if they're going up faster than house prices and goods and services. And the way to do that is to take purchasing power away from the rich, put it in the hands of ordinary people, and the way to achieve that is to tax the rich more and to tax you and ordinary working people less. We campaign for that on this channel every week. Send the video to your friends, send the video to your mum. Thanks for your support. Take care.